Simplifying the explanation of Surah Al-Imran, verses 130-132. O you who have believed, do not consume usury, doubled and multiplied, but fear Allah that you may be successful. And beware of the fire which has been prepared for the disbelievers. And obey God and the Messenger so that you may receive mercy.
Summary of the interpretation of Surah Al-Imran, verse 130 and 132. This verse addresses usury, riba. First, it is essential to understand its meaning to facilitate comprehension and reflection upon the verse. Usury is the exploitation of people's needs and circumstances, whether by lending money in exchange for interest on top of the principal, or by exchanging something for its own kind with the condition of an increase. Therefore, usury is considered forbidden and wicked money because it is based on exploiting people's weakness and need, not on mercy and justice. The Quran likens the state of the usurer to eating, as if this wicked money nourishes the body with what is forbidden, corrupting the heart and soul before it corrupts the money itself. Furthermore, God Almighty clarifies for the believers the lessons learned from the Battle of Uhud. The first transgression was the reason for the incomplete victory, disobeying the Prophet's, peace and blessings be upon him, command. This teaches us that if we choose trustworthy and experienced people, we must obey their commands. How much more so when the leader is the messenger of God, peace and blessings be upon him, who does not speak from his own desires, but rather conveys the message of God Almighty. Some of the archers disobeyed the Prophet's, peace and blessings be upon him, command when they saw the spoils of war, and they descended from their positions before he gave them permission, hoping to take them. This action combined two errors: disobeying the Prophet's command, peace and blessings be upon him, and coveting what was not permitted. A subtle point to ponder is that greed for wealth, or haste in acquiring it, can corrupt the heart and lead one to sin. This is why verses warning against usury follow the account of the Battle of Uhud, as usury is also based on greed and exploiting people's needs. The verse then speaks of God's command to be mindful of Him, urging believers to fear Him. Mindfulness means protection from God's wrath. How do we protect ourselves from God's wrath? By following what God and His Messenger have commanded and avoiding what they have forbidden. Another subtle point to ponder in the Quran is that the phrase, "be mindful of God," is always appropriate to the context of the verse, as if mindfulness is practically translated according to the situation addressed. In verses about family, mindfulness is mercy, justice, and good conduct. In verses about obligatory duties, it is obedience, commitment, and diligence. And in verses about wealth, it is trustworthiness and avoiding injustice and greed. Here, after God forbade usury, He said, "And fear God that you may be successful." Piety here is a call to refrain from exploiting people's needs, to purify wealth from what is forbidden, to show mercy to the debtor and not increase his debt, to resist greed and avarice, and to trust that lawful sustenance from God is better than wealth acquired unjustly. The meaning of piety here is that a person places a barrier between himself and God's wrath by refraining from consuming people's wealth unjustly. And when God Almighty says that you may be successful, the word success is used to encourage the believer to obey God and follow His path. God likened this to something we constantly see in our lives: planting and farming. The farmer plows the land, sows the seeds, waters and toils, and after patience and effort, the harvest time comes, and he sees the fruit of his labor. Likewise, the believer. He may find it difficult to abandon what is forbidden, to strive against his desires, and to adhere to God's commands, but ultimately he reaps goodness and success in this life and the hereafter. God Almighty commanded us to fear the fire, meaning to fear His punishment. Therefore, there are 2 points here. God Almighty grants you the benefit of success through fearing Him, and He protects you from the harm of hellfire. Fearing the fire means being mindful of God's punishment, and through obedience to God and His messenger, God protects you from hellfire. For if a believer is kept away from hellfire and admitted to paradise, this is the ultimate triumph. This is why, when crossing the bridge over hell, God Almighty will show us hellfire, so that we may understand how faith saved us from it, and so that we may know the means to succeed and be protected from hellfire. The means is to follow the path conveyed by the messenger of God, which is to obey God and His messenger. This is from God's mercy upon us.